Hi everybody, welcome back to another Impact and Influence. Incredibly excited today to have a gentleman with us who I don't think anybody in this industry would not know who you are, Pete. So Pete Matthews, whether you know him from his incredible business, whether you know him as an auctioneer, the REI, NSW or Realtair, take your pick. Pete, how are you?
Yeah, great, Kylie. How are you?
I'm awesome. Just back from New York?
Yes, I had a really, it was a great privilege to go to New York to the Inman conference, and I had a few meetings over there as well. But I like to keep in touch with what's happening on the global market, particularly the US, because there's plenty happening over there for us to learn from.
I think there's heaps going on. I mean, we were in New York last year. We did a study tour with some clients in January, and one of the things that we found really interesting was what was going on in court and with their agencies at the moment. Is there any updates on that over there at the moment?
Yeah, so just, I guess, a bit of summary. So the Department of Justice actually took the NAR and a couple of the major real estate groups, when I say a couple, a lot of them, to court, basically saying that the way that an agent is remunerated, which is about a 6% fee, as you know, which is paid fully by the seller, is that 6% is then split between the buyer's agent and the selling agent. And what they're suggesting, and certainly has been proven in court, because the judgments come down to say in favour of those litigating, basically to say that there's a conflict of interest that the buyer's agent is paid for out of the seller's commission, which, you know, as we do it here in Australia, it's pretty simple. We get a seller's agency fee, and that gets paid to the selling agent. You know, if there's a buyer's agent involved, that buyer's agent is paid independently. So they're moving towards our system, and the update is that there's a lot of changes to the way that MLSs work, the multiple listing services. There's about 500 of those, and also the way in which buyer's agents have to demonstrate their services, because it is moving into that environment similar to ours, where they actually have to get paid for the services that they provide from the buyer themselves. And if you can imagine, Kylie, like as a buyer, you could have representation, somebody to work with you to find a home for you, and you never had to pay anything for it. You know, now you're going to have to pay sort of close to 3%. So it's a pretty big shift.
Really interesting. You know, it's an interesting model. So that's coming to being closed out over there, is it, Pete?
Yeah, they're still working through that. There's been a couple of settlements. In fact, the Anywhere Group, which is kind of it used to be called Realogy, which is the house of brands, they've recently announced at the conference actually that they had settled all of their claims to date. So they couldn't disclose what the nature of those settlements are, but effectively all of the businesses are now looking at what it is that they can do to avoid being sued for that. Because if they are being sued, then they lose all of their commission, both to the seller and to the buyer side of things. So they're just changing their model right now and trying to work out the best way to do that. And I think we're a really good example, because we operate exactly the way that they're sort of looking to go over. But it'll take a couple of years, I think, for them to transition out of that.
Yeah, we'll watch that space. We've got some interesting contacts with some groups over there that we went and visited last year on our study tour. So we might revisit that and give everyone a bit of an update. I think there's some good learnings from it. So Pete, look, obviously we're going to touch a little bit on Realtair today, but that's not the reason I've asked you to be on the series, even though that's an incredible success story, and having had personal experience in the last business that I was involved in, what that can do around client experience, efficiencies, consistency and scale is incredible. But I want to go back a little bit. Pete, how many years this year in real estate?
34 years it will be. It's my 34th year I'm starting this year, which just blows me away when I think about, you know, when I first made the decision to get into real estate so many years ago, and I thought I would have retired by now, but no, not even close.
You can't retire. You love it too much, and you've still got so much.
You know what it's like, Kylie. None of us can retire. Like you might do slightly different things, but you'll never retire from real estate. It's too good. It's too much fun, and you know, it is also something that I think once you're into it, it becomes part of your soul. I think
yeah, it's addictive. Great people, great learnings, and as you say, I think we've become so much more sophisticated as an industry, and the curiosity about what's possible, particularly in the field that you're in now, is there's still too much to be done. But Pete, we get a lot of people listening to these series, and people subscribe in our database, and there'll be a lot of young talent listening to this, and a lot of young business owners that may be at the point with a recalibrating market in some marketplaces, that say, how do you keep going? How do you survive 34 years in industry? If we go back to what your journey started and what it looked like, was that straight into sales or straight into ownership? What did that look like?
Yeah, look, it was I was only just recounting this to a mutual friend of ours just a couple of days ago, where he asked me how did it all start. But I had a pretty different kind of start in real estate. I started as an office junior, was my title, which I hated that. And that was just because I wrote away 65 letters to auctioneers, valuers, and estate agents, and I got 12 replies and 1 interview, and that was with that job. So lucky I got it, but that was with the Ray White Group. And then after a year of kind of doing that and getting involved in the auction side of things, on the auction coordination side, I then was suggested that I move directly into sales, sort of skip property management, move straight into sales at 19. So I was given a choice, which was either Wagga or Bankstown, and I'd never been to Bankstown before in my life, and I'd never been to Wagga before in my life. So both of them were going to be outside of my comfort zone, and that was the suggestion from the powers that be at Ray White at the time, is that whatever choice that I made to go to either of those two offices was to do something that was out of my natural comfort zone. And Bankstown was my choice, mainly for the fact that it was a really highly multicultural market, and I kind of figured if I could learn to understand the cultural differences of the way people, live, behave, even negotiate, then that was never going to be a bad thing. So I was really lucky at 19 to get into sales and operate in the wonderful market of Yagoona, Birrong, and Sefton, which are markets just outside of the Bankstown area.
So Pete, I'm just going to close off on a couple of things there, again, particularly because we get a lot of young people or people earlier in their careers listening to this. The tenacity there with the number of letters that you sent, and just your dedication to getting in, doing things outside your comfort zone, but importantly, getting that experience with diversity and cultural experience to give you the gift of the gab, and experience in negotiation and influence across all markets is great. How hard was it to start, and what were your biggest learnings in the first 10 years in industry?
It was, I found it really challenging to start, because the thing that you look for, and I think anybody that's in sales, you look for what is that secret sauce that somebody that you look up to, that they've found and they've managed to put that into their business, and you search and search and search for that treasure chest of great ideas or great solutions or processes and all the rest of it. But the reality is that I kind of found, probably after 10 years, I was a bit of a slow learner, there wasn't such a thing. It doesn't exist. There is no secret sauce. It's actually, and I was talking to someone about this the other day, that it is just math. As much as our business it's got nothing to do with property, and it's got everything to do with relationships. The core of it it's just mathematical. It's, if you want to earn $1 million in commissions, well, you're in a marketplace that is $1 million average sale, and you're doing 10%. Well, there's a certain amount of commission that you can achieve, and you've got to make a certain amount of sales in order to get that total million. You've got to list a certain amount of properties to make those sales. You've got to appraise a certain amount of property to get those listings, and you've got to do a lot of prospecting in order to get those appraisals. So, it's not. I think probably that was the biggest lesson for me, Kylie, is just understanding that it is a process, and yes, it involves people and it involves property, but it is a numbers game, and the more people that you can engage with and you can touch and you can create trust and demonstrate your empathy and everything else, the reality is that unless you are looking to continue to fill that funnel and you know what your numbers are, then it is a much more challenging road than those that get that very, very early. So that's kind of probably the thing I wish could go back to my very younger self and say, look, get more process oriented, understand what a business plan actually looks like, and forget about trying to find the secret sauce, because it was right in front of me the entire time.
It's really interesting, isn't it? You hear so many people at conferences and talk over time, and I just don't know if people really listen around that relationship piece and process. We always looking for that secret sauce, or I think industry is. So obviously, hence, Realtair with process. But talking about how much faster, how much more capacity, how much more touch and relationship time you can have when process is absolutely nailed. So I think for anyone listening to this, and this is going to be released the first week in February, Pete, is if they haven't done that business plan and they haven't looked at their priorities for the new year, if nothing else, is make sure that process is absolutely down pat. And if you haven't already spoken to you guys from Realtair, and this isn't a paid introvert in commercial, is talk to you about it, because that speed and capacity and reach is so incredibly important. Now, relationships and process is something we just spoke about. Yeah. Auctions is something that you and I, when we were in sales, were absolutely ingrained in us, in our DNA and in our mantra. How important has an auction ethos been to you in your career and your relationships and your footprint?
I think it's probably been one of the most important things. And I think if you look at even some of the, as part of my early career, and in fact, for a long, long time, I was with the Ray White Group, and they're a phenomenal auction company, and they're a business that has really driven, sort of the auction culture, particularly here in Sydney, in the early years. And we never ever, in fact, worried about anything else other than market share in the auction space. And it's just purely because it's a great method of sale. It's good for the buyer, it's good for the seller, it's good for the agent. It keeps you process driven. Working towards deadlines and marketing, without a price and all that kind of stuff. Even if you're operating with a price range. It just gives you a lot more flexibility, but also I think from the seller's side of things is that it just gives a seller much more appreciation of what the market price of their property is over a much shorter period of time than the other options that are available. And being an auctioneer, and I worked out I've done just under 30,000 auctions. It's a little biased, my response to that question, to be honest. So I'm still doing auctions, not as many as what I used to, but I wouldn't subscribe to any other method of sale, frankly. I think that's going to be at the core of every single agent's business plan and part of their listing presentation strategy. Without it, it's a very different road.
Without a doubt. And I think, I'm yet to walk into an office or a network and see days on market any less for private treaty than auction in every single market you go into. Yeah. And I think the customer is demanding more and more now transparency. And if you ever want a transparent transaction, it's an auction campaign. So absolutely, that's something for everyone to look at in their business plan. Pete, I've got a couple more questions here, and I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to rip into them if it's okay. Sure. You've been an incredible leader over time for industry itself, with what you've done with the Institute, what you've done with technology and innovation, Realtair. But I guess where I first met you was when you were actually in agency practice, and what you did around retention, growth of market share and recruitment. With respect to leadership or retaining agents, what were your key learnings, and what would you most recommend to people either managing EBUs or growing EBUs, or principals that have got sales businesses, around handy hints, or if you had to time over again, or the things that had most impact for you?
Yeah, I think probably the most important thing is demonstrating leadership, and I know that's a really sort of almost cliched, but I think that the critical part of that is understanding what the plan is. Everybody understanding what their role is towards that plan, and then each person working towards that. So whether you're in an EBU or whether you're in a business, to not understand as a principle what it is that your salespeople are looking to achieve, and then how that translates directly into your business plan. But then don't just take it at a commission level. Like, it's got to get down to, and this is what we do at Realtair with every new customer these days, is that we actually want to take them through a business plan to say, well, if this year is going to be the same or better than what it was last year, what is going to be done differently for you to be able to get to those numbers? And again, going back to that sort of, I guess, that math to say, well, if we know we've got to get this many sales and this many listings and this many appraisals, how are we going to generate the appraisals? And having this really, really strong focus on the basic stuff, because I think the thing for any business owner and for anyone who's leading a team it is the first thing that gets dropped off is the most important thing, which is the prospecting side of things. You could have some terrific listers, but unless they're actually getting in front of owners to be able to do appraisals, they're not going to be able to grow their business. And the only thing really that you can rely upon is making sure that you've got a pipeline that is continually being filled. And that is a really difficult discipline, I think, to install in someone who's new, because as you know, like most salespeople, and I am one, we do work today, we want a result today. And that just doesn't happen in real estate. You can be lucky. I was lucky in Allen Street, Yaguna, Kylie, when I first did my telemarketing calls. The second call that I made out of the 100 that I was planning to make that afternoon and evening, I got an appraisal and then I got a listing. The fifth call, I got an appraisal and I got a listing. And I thought, this is great. But then I had 95 no's after that. So I think the thing is that to me, that's the most critical thing, is just getting that prospecting plan sorted out early, because if that becomes the focus rather than the celebration of, a sale or the celebration of a listing, it should be about the celebration of prospecting. And if the process is right, where you've got that strong conversion from prospecting to appraisal through to listing, and then you've got a great servicing platform, then the commission will come. Like to just have a number that says I want to earn this amount in gross commissions, just never ever enough. There's got to be a plan, and for every single person in the business. And I was a bit more diligent on that in my younger years, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think too, interesting when you were saying there around leadership. I kind of feel sometimes that industries let industry down. Given the number of business owners or people that run EBUs are great salespeople, is they may not have had the foundation learnings or insights around leadership, and it really does make such a difference to both retention and recruitment of customer and team, right? So if people in EBUs are constantly turning over, team members, is the disruption that brings to prospecting, the disruption it brings to processes is a real problem. So that would be, I think, from Pete and I, if you're in the EBU in particular, or a business owner and you're a sales agent, is really make sure that you're getting some great mentoring learning on leadership. Great podcasts out there and lots of things to listen to.
There's so much more on leadership now when you compare when we got into business, and you think about all the great things that you can access, whether it's things like this where you can just listen to a conversation and pick up something from it. And that's the thing I think too, is that there's an expectation, I've done that, so I don't need to worry about it. It's fine to do something, but you've actually got to get from an idea to execution. And if it doesn't move to execution, then an idea is worth nothing. And I hear a lot on the tech space where I have people say, it'd be really good if we could do this, it'd be really good if we could do that. And I love hearing that, because we've got the capacity to execute. But when you have people say, well, look, I've got an idea and it's a really valuable idea, the idea is worth nothing unless you actually follow through and get something done. And the same thing applies when you've got, a team of people. People are attracted to people who make things happen and who execute, not people who are going to, or the gunners, or those that just talk and never actually follow through.
Yeah, I think the technical term, Pete, and excuse the bogan Narrabri girl in me, is the people that get shit done. The credibility, that brings to people as well, and results. But we say it all the time, right? We all go to a conference and we see some new tech idea or something, and we come back and plug it into an office. But that inability to actually integrate it and execute it properly, then people say, it didn't work, or it wasn't for us. But we probably didn't really give it, the chance or the opportunity. Pete, we're 30 minutes in. I want to finish with 2 or 3 questions, if I may. I could talk to you all afternoon, and there's probably a number of lessons in here around tech and innovation, etc. But I really wanted today to focus on your leadership journey and your industry journey. Was who has had, I guess, the biggest impact on you in your career, and why? So have you had a mentor along the way, or?
I've been really lucky, Kylie, to have so many people that have influenced my career. But if I go back to probably the very early days, I think back to like Tony Fountain. Tony, passed away several years ago, and you knew Tony well as well. And he probably, particularly in the auctioneering side, made me understand the difference between calling an auction and actually, creating an auction. And, we used to say that, that one, you're only as good as your last auction, and never expect to be continually booked unless, you have that philosophy. Secondly, is that clowns never cry. You might be having a bad day, but you need to turn that switch on when you are the auctioneer. And that auctions are all about theatre, and it's the auctioneer's, responsibility and role to work with the sales team to make that auction exciting and different. And, I guess that's where, Tony had, he brought humour to auctions, and always believed that if people felt a connection to the auctioneer, that they're more likely to let go of their hard-earned cash than if they felt that it was a combative style of auctioneering. And
that's great advice. Really good advice.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd probably say from a sales perspective, I remember an early trainer, Miff Porter, she was part of the Ray White group, and Miff used to have this saying that if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always had. And the fact that, change, and you look at change in our industry and how well we adapt to change when we have to, I think making the decision to change without being forced to do that is a really, that really is the lifeblood to a person's growth, is just not being content with what you do and what you've got, is to always stretch and change and evolve. And I'm not suggesting that people have to take on everything new that comes out. You don't have to be at the bleeding edge of everything, but you have to be looking at, where the trends are moving and start changing your business to move in that direction. Because the one thing that I took from Inman, amongst others, but this one, was that they talked about, that the relationship that you have with your customer is the key. And they're now saying, well, that really is probably, it's a little bit yesterday's news. What they're actually saying is the experience that you provide the customer is the key. And, that we're in an experience game now moving forward more than ever. We've morphed from a relationship game to an experience game. And you look at the application of technology, and particularly AI, as that gains, momentum and provides value in how we, transact. A buyer's experience and a seller's experience with you as an agent is the most important thing, because they will transact again, and you want them to make sure that they're going to transact with you because of that experience, and also share what a great job that you've done. And that experience can be, as it can be very different agent to agent. So that's one big takeout I kind of found from the Inman conference as well, was just that shift from relationship to experience.
Like, there's some pearls, like absolute pearls in that last bit that you've just said. And I think around, it was funny, you said earlier when you were doing prospecting, I was really lucky. I reckon the harder you work, the luckier you get, right? Yeah. So there's no coincidence there with your career. But that client experience, and I think anyone that deals with our company or has met me knows that I'm massive on client experience. But that, like you say, what tech can do, and evolution around capacity, speed, transparency, memorable moments with your customer is so incredibly important. And if we stay still, we become redundant pretty quickly. So Pete, I just want to finish on one question, if I may. And I didn't premise this with you from the outset, so you may need to think about it. But knowing you, I reckon you'll be all right with the words. It'll come pretty quickly. Okay. What is one time that you've really screwed up in real estate, and what your learnings, and what would you say to people that are listening around beware that this could happen, and what to do if you do it?
Oh, I can tell you, like, straight off the bat. I took a property to auction in Balmain. When I say took it to auction, it was in the auction marketing campaign. I issued contracts on the property, did all that kind of stuff. I then, about 3 days before the auction was scheduled, I had a buyer who expressed interest in the property, write back to me via their solicitor saying, please explain why there's a 149 certificate that is about a property in, I think it was somewhere in Newcastle, for a property I was selling in Balmain. And I did not review the contract. I made the assumption that the solicitors got it right. And this was the second property that I'd sold for these owners, and it was the same solicitor in both instances. And I didn't review the contract. And luckily I had enough time to get the 149 certificate and rectify the problem. But that made me realise very, very early. And when I think back, that was about 1994, I think it was. That was a very valuable lesson where I could have created a contract between two parties that was an invalid contract. I would have been responsible because I didn't review it, because I would have probably exchanged it if we sold it at auction. And that made me sort of understand compliance and the importance of compliance. And as you know, even on the REI side of things, having dealings with fair trading and everything, and sort of hearing some of the horror stories, I think I was very fortunate to have that problem early, because it made me focus a lot on making sure that my agency agreements were right, that they're always up to date, that I had all the documentation that I needed, that I reviewed all of the contracts. And I think that's probably what really highlighted, getting the process right, because what we tend to do in real estate is to try and, agents typically are known to be like water. They'll try and find a way, the easiest way to achieve something. And they only ever worry about, relying on, agreements once they need to, but we need to rely on those every single time. And that's probably the best mistake that I've made that helped me, I think, take my career a lot further, just making sure I dot my I's and cross my T's. And it never happened again, ever.
I think that's the thing, right? So for business owners listening, or again, people running EBUs, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. It's my favourite saying in the world.
I like that.
When stuff goes wrong, learn from it, fix it. But even just that one, for people listening today, it'd be really interesting to see how many people have their processes. I mean, obviously, if they use Realtair, it's taken care of for them, but to see how many people have actually got in their systems when they get a contract, who checks it, and is the sales agent that's involved in it actually across the contract and advising. And you think about the 20, 30, 40, 50 grand that we all get paid, and what the solicitor makes out of it. And should we read the contract? Should we be across the Absolutely we should, right? So I think that's a really good learning. Pete, I am so grateful for your time. You're an absolute gentleman, and you've done so much for this industry, and I thank you. We will release this in the next couple of days. I'm sure that everyone will get a lot from it. Anything that you'd like to say or leave us with today?
Look, I really appreciate spending the time having a chat with you, Kylie. And the thing that the industry's been part of my DNA forever, and it always will be. I think that as an industry, the more that we can, embrace change, particularly the technology impact that it's having, and look at ways that we can improve the experience that we provide consumers, I think that we need to spend a lot more time as an industry looking at what we do in our process and how that can impact the consumer. Because if we look at it through the consumer's eyes, and you look at the way that property is transacted across the country today, it is nowhere near as transparent as it should be. It is nowhere near, the average experience that it should be. Like, no one ever says that they had a great experience buying property, no matter where you are. And I think that as an industry, we've got a lot that we can do to improve that on the consumer side, and take advantage of all the suppliers in the marketplace that can assist with that, as well as sort of working with industry bodies and institutes, so that we can, in a united way, make sure that experience that we've seen over the last 30 odd years is a much more transparent, clearer, and enjoyable experience for consumers into the future. Because I think if that happens, we'll actually see the number of transactions increase, because no one ever feels that it's been a great thing to engage in buying and selling a property. No one ever said that, ever. I'd love to see that, in the next 5 years, to be realistic, to see that change, and to see the perception of real estate agents go from third from the bottom. I'd be happy with somewhere midway. That would make me really, really happy. If we can get third from the top, that'd be incredible. But I think that's the thing I'd like to leave with everyone. And I hope that in anything that I do, and like in what you do, Kylie, that we can have an impact on sort of achieving that outcome, because that's the best outcome we can look for from an industry perspective.
What a great legacy, and I think a great way to wrap. Everything you spoke about today is around process, right? So consistency breeds trust. Trust is the foundation of every relationship. So what a great focus for 2024 to improve the client experience impact. and the perception of industry on the customer. Pete, thanks so much for your time. Very grateful. Have a great 2024.
Thanks, you too, Kylie. See you soon.